The landing platform shimmered beneath the twin suns, its metallic surface throwing back a glare so sharp that Ryan Holt briefly considered whether the alien queen's ceremonial arrival was designed to blind the entire welcoming committee. He adjusted the collar of his uniform, which was too tight and definitely too clean. Someone had apparently decided that grease stains and scorch marks were not appropriate when greeting interstellar royalty. As if on cue, the diplomatic shuttle descended with the slow grace of a predator bird, its hull black and etched with pale silver markings that glowed faintly, like starlight caught in glass. The ramp lowered. Ryan had seen her before, on broadcasts, in the grainy footage that made her look almost unreal, but nothing prepared him for the actual presence of Queen Kalira. She was tall, statuesque, every movement fluid as if gravity itself worked differently around her. Her hair, a cascade of silver so pure it could have been forged from moonlight, fell over her shoulders with calculated elegance. The most striking feature, however, was the shape of her ears, long, slender, tapering to sharp points that gave her an aura of perpetual attentiveness. The guards flanking her were rigid, but Kalira's eyes, sharp as polished obsidian, scanned the colony with a curiosity that was almost predatory. "You're Ryan Holt," she said, her voice like glass sliding over silk. Not a question, more like a statement of mild annoyance that the universe had decided this man, with his scruffy brown hair and oil-stained hands, would be her human liaison. "Yes, Your Majesty," Ryan said, and then immediately regretted adding, "Welcome to Urandor Colony. Watch your step, our cleaning bots are on strike again." He smiled, mostly to test if she had any sense of humor or if this was the moment his diplomatic career would end. Her head tilted slightly, as though she were decoding some obscure alien language. Then, to his mild shock, her lips curved. "Do you always greet monarchs by insulting their footwear hazards?" "Only when they're likely to trip and trigger an interstellar incident," he said. A pause. "Not that you'd trip, obviously. You look like the type who could walk across a plasma field and still look regal." She gave a small, amused hum, but said nothing. Her gaze had already shifted, drawn to something Ryan hadn't noticed, an abandoned stack of cargo crates near the edge of the landing bay. A faint sound reached them, barely audible over the hum of engines. A sound that did not belong here, a high-pitched mewl, thin and desperate. Kalira's posture shifted. "What is that?" she asked. Ryan blinked. "What is what?" "That sound. Something small." Her sharp ears twitched slightly. He hadn't known they could move like that. Without waiting for an answer, she strode toward the crates, her long coat sweeping the ground behind her like a silver shadow. Careful," Ryan called, jogging after her. "There might be rats in there, or worse, space rats. Those things bite through titanium." But she ignored him, her movements precise, almost too graceful for someone poking around abandoned shipping materials. She crouched, peering into a narrow gap. The sound came again, a tiny, trembling cry. With a motion that was far gentler than Ryan expected from someone who ruled half a galaxy, Kalira reached in and pulled out a bundle of matted fur, smaller than her palm. A kitten, thin, dusty, its eyes wide and shining like liquid gold. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Ryan, who had seen Kalira command fleets with a flick of her hand on the holoscreens, found himself weirdly transfixed by the way she looked at the tiny creature, her expression unreadable but softer than anything he'd seen before. "It's a cat," Ryan offered, because his brain wasn't functioning. "A kitten, actually. You know, small terrestrial predator, domesticated by humans thousands of years ago, now mainly employed to knock things off tables and look cute while doing it." Kalira turned her gaze on him. "You leave creatures this fragile to die." "Well," Ryan said, rubbing the back of his neck, "not on purpose. Someone probably dumped it here. Colony life is exactly pet-friendly. Half our food is in powdered form, and the other half tastes like disappointment." Kalira looked back at the kitten, which had started to purr, an absurdly tiny, vibrating sound that made her long ears twitch again. Slowly, almost cautiously, she cradled the creature against her chest. The guards exchanged worried glances, as though trying to decide if this was a test or if their queen had suddenly lost all sense of protocol. "Do you want me to take it to the shelter?" Ryan asked, trying to sound casual but inwardly fascinated by this unexpected development. "No," Kalira said, her voice carrying the finality of a sealed decree. "It is mine." There was a long silence, broken only by the kitten's faint purring. Ryan blinked. Pardon, did you just adopt it?" Kalira's brow furrowed slightly, as if the concept of adoption was some ancient ritual she had yet to decode. "It was abandoned. That is unacceptable." Ryan grinned. "Well, congratulations, Your Majesty. You've just become the proud mother of a very small, very confused furball. I'd recommend naming it something regal. Like, I don't know, Destroyer of Sofas or Fluffus Maximus." Her eyes narrowed, but he swore there was the tiniest hint of amusement in them. "Its name," she declared, "is irrelevant. It is alive. That is enough." As they walked back toward the waiting shuttle, the kitten tucked into the curve of her arm like it had always belonged there. Ryan couldn't help but imagine the chaos this would cause. Somewhere in the vast empire, ministers and nobles were about to have a collective meltdown over the fact that their queen had just claimed a stray kitten as her own. And for some reason, that thought made him want to laugh out loud. "Just wait until it starts climbing the royal curtains," he muttered under his breath. Kalira glanced sideways. "What did you say?" "Nothing," Ryan said quickly. "Just, wondering if your empire is ready for, well, that." He pointed at the kitten, which had decided her sleeve made an excellent scratching post. The queen looked down at the tiny creature, then back at him. "They will adapt. The royal transport was not designed for kittens." This fact became painfully obvious within the first hour of Queen Kalira's return journey. Shadowfluff. Ryan had suggested the name as a joke, but somehow it had stuck, had discovered that the shimmering, holographic navigation panels made excellent playthings. The kitten leapt and batted at the projections with an enthusiasm usually reserved for intergalactic dogfights, leaving the pilots looking like they were one swipe away from ejecting themselves out of the nearest airlock. Kalira sat in her throne-like seat with the kitten nestled on her lap, appearing perfectly at ease as Shadowfluff attempted to climb her elaborate ceremonial sleeve. "It is curious," she said in her calm, commanding tone, "why your species allows such small creatures to infiltrate their homes. It seems inefficient." Ryan, sitting across from her, leaned back and smirked. "Inefficient, maybe, but look at that face." He tilted his head toward the kitten, who was now dangling from Kalira's sleeve like a fluffy ornament. "That's the face of a creature that knows how to conquer without lifting a weapon. Honestly, I think it just claimed your entire empire." Kalira gave him a look that could have frozen a sun, though it was dulled slightly by the fact that the kitten was currently batting at her hair, as if it were a set of dangling silver toys. "It is small," she said, "but it is fierce. I respect that." "Good," Ryan said with mock solemnity. "That's the first step toward true cat ownership. Step 2 is realizing you don't own the cat, it owns you. Step 3 is cleaning up hairballs at the worst possible moments." Hairballs? Kalira's expression sharpened as though he had just introduced a dangerous new weapon into her empire. "Explain." Ryan said, trying not to laugh. "You'll find out. Think of it as the cat's way of keeping you humble." The conversation was interrupted by a chime from the ship's comms. A holographic projection of one of Kalira's ministers flickered to life, looking particularly stern. His gaze drifted immediately to the kitten sitting on the queen's lap, and his expression faltered. "Your Majesty," he began, trying to regain his composure, "may I inquire as to the presence of that creature?" "This is Shadowfluff," Kalira said simply, stroking the kitten's head with a grace that was both regal and faintly awkward. "It is mine." The minister's jaw worked soundlessly. "A pet, Majesty." Ryan coughed. "She means royal advisor, possibly the cutest one you've got." Kalira's long ears twitched. a sign that Ryan had learned meant she was suppressing amusement. "You will prepare suitable accommodations for it in the palace," she ordered the minister. "See that it receives the same care as my other companions." The minister's expression was that of a man who had just been ordered to negotiate with a sentient cupcake. "As you command, Majesty," he said before the hologram flickered out. Ryan was still chuckling when Shadowfluff made a daring leap from Kalira's lap to his shoulder. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "It prefers you," she observed. "Cats don't prefer anyone," Ryan said, carefully removing Shadowfluff's claws from his uniform. "They just like to give you the illusion of choice, like taxes or gravity." Kalira studied the kitten as if trying to unravel its mysteries. "It is warm," she said, almost to herself. "When I hold it, I feel its heartbeat. It is different from the beings I have known." "That's because most of the beings you know probably don't fit in your hand," Ryan said. "Trust me, small doesn't mean unimportant. Humans learned that the hard way. Ants, viruses, lawyers." She gave him a questioning look, but decided not to ask. By the time they arrived at the palace, word of the Queen's new companion had spread across the Empire's communication networks. The guards who opened the landing bay doors tried, and failed, to conceal their confusion when they saw the Queen stepping off the transport with a tiny ball of fur tucked into the crook of her arm. They saluted anyway, their expressions hovering somewhere between awe and disbelief. Inside the palace, things got worse. Shadowfluff immediately declared war on a priceless, hand-woven tapestry by clawing at its threads like it was unraveling a rival empire. The palace staff froze, unsure whether to intervene or just let the tiny creature dismantle royal history. Ryan leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, grinning. "Looks like the cat's redecorating. I'd say that pattern was a little outdated anyway." Kalira watched the kitten's assault with a calculating expression. "It displays determination," she said. "Perhaps I should allow it." "See," Ryan said, "you're already becoming a cat person. Next thing you know, you'll be talking to it like it understands." Kalira glanced down at Shadowfluff, who had now settled into a triumphant sprawl on the ruined tapestry. "It understands more than it reveals," she said, her tone completely serious. Later, as the palace quieted, Kalira summoned Ryan to the council chamber. The kitten, naturally, followed, padding across the polished floor like it owned the place. As Kalira took her seat, Shadowfluff jumped onto the table, sat squarely in front of the galaxy-wide holographic display, and started licking its paw. The council members who joined the meeting via holofeed stared in stunned silence. "This," Kalira said with absolute calm, "is Shadowfluff. You will become accustomed to its presence." Is it sitting on the Imperial map?" one of the admirals asked, visibly bewildered. "Yes," Kalira replied. "It has claimed the Outer Rim territories." Ryan burst out laughing, earning a sharp look from both the Queen and the Admiral. "Sorry," he said, trying to compose himself. "Just let me know when you promote it to Fleet Commander." Kalira didn't answer, but the smallest smirk tugged at her lips. By the third day, Shadowfluff had successfully taken over Kalira's palace as if it had been bred for conquest. No defense system, no royal protocol, and certainly no guard had been prepared for a creature that could look so small, yet demand so much attention. The kitten now had its own bed, although it preferred Kalira's robes, and an entire wing of the palace staff had been tasked with procuring items like toys, soft bedding, and premium fish paste, all of which sounded to the royal advisors like supplies for an alien dignitary rather than a furball with claws. Kalira sat in the grand dining hall, a plate of delicately prepared nutrient cubes in front of her, while Shadowfluff perched on the table, meowing with an intensity that suggested it was planning a coup. "You are relentless," she observed, breaking a cube in half and placing it before the kitten, who immediately sniffed it, rejected it, and batted it onto the floor with imperial disdain. Ryan, seated opposite her, bit back a grin. "Congratulations. You've discovered what every human cat owner already knows. Cats are tiny food critics with no sense of gratitude. Kalira raised an eyebrow. It finds our cuisine unworthy. Does it require hunting? Not unless you want it to bring you dead lizards as trophies, Ryan said. And trust me, you don't. The first time a cat does that, you'll question every life decision you've ever made. Kalira glanced at Shadowfluff, who was now trying to scale a towering goblet like a miniature mountaineer. It is bold, she said with a note of admiration. Perhaps it will lead armies one day. Yeah, Ryan said. Armies of hairballs and scratching posts. The conversation was interrupted by a notification on the holoscreen embedded in the wall. A new broadcast had gone out across the Empire, featuring grainy footage of Kalira walking through the colony with the kitten cradled in her arms. The headline read, "Queen of Stars claims mysterious creature, symbol of change or madness." Ryan almost spit out his drink. Wow, you've officially gone viral. Kalira frowned. Viral. Human term. It means your actions are spreading across every communication network faster than a flu outbreak. People are debating what it means. Some say it's a sign you're softening. Others think the kitten is some kind of secret weapon. Kalira looked at Shadowfluff, who was now chewing on a napkin. A weapon of what? Cuteness, Ryan said. Deadly, unstoppable cuteness. Kalira considered this seriously, as though evaluating a new military strategy. Perhaps that is an advantage. Later that day, Kalira invited Ryan to the Royal Gardens, an enormous biosphere of alien flora, maintained under complex artificial climate systems. Shadowfluff bounded through the grass, chasing strange insect-like creatures that glowed faintly under the pale light. Kalira walked beside Ryan, her hands clasped behind her back. Your species places value on caring for such beings, she said, watching as the kitten pounced clumsily on a harmless floating spore. Yeah, Ryan said. We like to think it makes us better. It's easy to be strong when you've got power. It's harder when you choose to be gentle, even with something tiny and defenseless. Kalira glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. You believe compassion is strength. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us from turning into monsters, Ryan said, shrugging. Well, that and snacks. Snacks? Kalira repeated, clearly confused. Never mind, Ryan said, grinning. Their conversation was interrupted when Shadowfluff, chasing a glowing insect, toppled into a shallow ornamental pond with a splash. The kitten emerged soaked, looking both offended and utterly pitiful. Ryan burst out laughing while Kalira immediately scooped it up, holding it at arm's length as if unsure whether this was a normal occurrence. It is defective, Kalira declared, staring at the soggy fur. Nope, Ryan said, wiping tears from his eyes. Just a regular cat. They're experts at embarrassing themselves and pretending it was all part of the plan. Kalira wrapped the kitten in her own sash, drying it with careful, deliberate movements. Her guards stared, as though they just witnessed the most unqueenly thing she'd ever done. Yet there was no hesitation in her touch, only an odd sort of patience. That evening, as Kalira sat on her throne during a hollow conference with her council, Shadowfluff climbed up her shoulder and draped itself like a living scarf. The council members tried to maintain their usual stern expressions, but one of them accidentally muttered, "Adorable," before catching themselves. Kalira heard it and allowed herself the faintest smile. Your Majesty, one of the generals said, there are concerns that this animal is a distraction. Kalira's voice was cool but firm. If a creature so small can distract you, perhaps you are not ready for command. Ryan, who was standing off to the side, stifled a laugh. He leaned toward one of the aides and whispered, "She's really leaning into the cat mom vibe." The aide, terrified, pretended not to hear him. When the meeting ended, Kalira turned to Ryan. You will teach me more about these human customs, about caring. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Are we talking about cats or people? Both, she said, stroking the kitten's head. It seems they are not so different. True, Ryan said, except cats shed more. Her long ears twitched, but this time she didn't bother hiding her smile. The council chamber erupted into chaos long before Kalira even spoke. A leaked holofeed of Shadowfluff knocking over the Empire's ceremonial artifact, a priceless crystalline orb said to represent the unity of Kalira's star systems, had gone viral across every planetary network. Nobles were horrified, soldiers were bewildered. Merchants had already started producing plush replicas of the kitten, some of which wore tiny crowns. Kalira walked into the meeting with the real Shadowfluff perched on her shoulder, utterly unconcerned. The kitten yawned like it owned the galaxy. "Your Majesty," began General Varric, his voice strained, "I must speak plainly. Your creature has become a distraction. The Empire is whispering. There are rumors that the kitten is a symbol of rebellion, that it—" "Rebellion," Ryan interjected from the back of the chamber. "Come on, the most rebellious thing this kitten has done is destroy a pair of curtains, and to be fair, they were ugly curtains." The general glared at Ryan, who smiled innocently. Kalira raised her hand, silencing everyone. "This creature represents nothing but life," she said. "If my empire is shaken by a being that weighs less than a data pad, then perhaps the empire is too fragile to begin with." Ryan clapped once. "I'm just saying if she gives it a cape, we're all in trouble. Supercat will overthrow us all." Shadowfluff, as if understanding the moment, chose that exact time to leap onto the council table and sprawl across the holographic star map. Systems blinked out of view beneath its tiny body. Admiral Narith stared, horrified. "Your Majesty, the outer belt, it's under the cat." Kalira didn't blink. "Then it is claimed," she said coolly. The council chamber went silent. Ryan leaned toward one of the stunned aides and muttered, "I'd love to see the historical records on that one." Empire expanded by one fluffy overlord. The meeting ended with Kalira's word being final, as always. The council filed out, muttering about tradition and propriety. But no one dared defy her while the kitten stood guard, tail twitching like a furry metronome of dominance. Later that day, Kalira summoned Ryan to the observation deck. Shadowfluff lay curled in her lap, purring like a tiny engine. Through the massive windows, the nebulae shimmered, bright clouds of gold and violet gas twisting in the void. Kalira didn't look away from the stars as she spoke. "Your species finds strength in caring for the weak. I did not understand it before. I am beginning to." Ryan tilted his head. "You know, for someone who commands entire fleets, that's a big admission. Next, you'll be telling me you're getting attached." Her long ears twitched. "Perhaps I am." Shadowfluff sneezed suddenly, startling them both. Ryan laughed. "Yeah, that's how it starts. First, you worry about the kitten. Next, you're feeding stray space dogs and asking about human festivals." Kalira's expression sharpened. "Festivals? Forget I said anything," Ryan said, smirking. The next crisis came sooner than expected. During a diplomatic reception with the trade delegates of Alaris IV, Shadowfluff made an unscheduled appearance by leaping onto the banquet table and attacking the delegates' gelatinous centerpiece. One of the Ilarian ambassadors, who was mostly composed of semi-transparent ooze, was so confused by the assault that it spilled half of itself onto the floor. Ryan choked back laughter as Kalira calmly picked up the kitten and placed it on her shoulder. "It has chosen to inspect your cuisine," she announced. "Consider it a compliment." "Is that what this is?" The ambassador gurgled uncertainly. Ryan gave a reassuring nod. "Oh yes. If the cat doesn't destroy it, it means it's probably not worth eating." To everyone's surprise, the tension eased. The ambassadors began asking questions about the kitten, apparently charmed by its audacity. By the end of the evening, Shadowfluff had won them over completely, sitting like a furry diplomat as the trade treaty was signed. After the guests left, Kalira glanced at Ryan. "Your people's humor is unusual." "It's either laugh or panic," Ryan said, "and laughing is cheaper." Kalira looked at Shadowfluff, who had fallen asleep on the treaty documents. "Perhaps humor is another kind of strength." The following morning, Ryan found himself summoned to Kalira's private chambers. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, Shadow Fluff curled in her lap as she brushed its fur with surprising patience. "I require your assistance," she said. "Does this involve cat training?" Ryan asked, leaning against the doorway. "Because if it does, I should warn you, cats don't get trained, they train you." Kalira's sharp gaze shifted to him. "Then I will learn." Ryan chuckled. "All right, lesson 1, you're already losing, look at you. You've got a whole empire and this thing has you sitting on the floor." Kalira looked down at the kitten, who purred smugly. "Perhaps losing is not always bad." Her words were calm, but something in her tone made Ryan pause. "You're talking about more than the cat, aren't you?" he asked quietly. Kalira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stroked Shadowfluff's tiny head, her eyes distant. "This creature shows me something I have not seen in years, something unguarded. It is teaching me." Ryan grinned softly. "Well, that's cats for you, tiny, fluffy philosophers." Her long ears flicked in amusement. "Then perhaps I have found my wisest advisor." Shadowfluff rolled over, unconcerned with its newfound political importance. The assassination attempt came on the day Shadowfluff decided the royal throne was an ideal napping spot. Kalira was mid-sentence during a public ceremony when the lights flickered, the hum of the palace shields cut out, and a cloaked figure burst into the hall. It was fast, sharp, and aimed directly at her, a shadow among shadows. The guards reacted, but Ryan reacted faster. He grabbed a ceremonial staff, mostly decorative and definitely not balanced for combat, and swung it with a clumsy arc that sent the attacker sprawling. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Shadowfluff, awoken by the noise, leapt onto the would-be assassin's head and latched on like a furry helmet of doom. The man's yells were drowned out by the kitten's fierce hissing and Ryan's laughter. "Oh look," Ryan said, panting as he yanked the attacker's weapon away. "Shadowfluff just earned its keep." Kalira stood tall, composed even as her guards dragged the intruder away. Her gaze lingered on Ryan, who was still holding the ceremonial staff like he expected it to explode. "You risked your life," she said softly, though her tone carried the weight of something deeper. Ryan said, trying to play it off. "I've fought worse. Once wrestled a maintenance bot. Long story, lost that one." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Shadowfluff returned to her shoulder, purring as though nothing had happened, and the ceremony continued, though no one could focus on anything but the kitten now acting as the Empire's unofficial security chief. The news spread faster than any official announcement. Across the Empire, Shadowfluff became a symbol of both resilience and absurdity. Soldiers painted the kitten's likeness on their armor. Engineers started creating mini-robots modeled after it. Kalira didn't encourage it, but she didn't stop it either. She found herself amused and oddly proud that something so small could spark such unity. That evening, Kalira summoned Ryan to the observation deck. Shadowfluff sprawled across both their laps, utterly spoiled after a feast of premium fish cubes. The nebula outside glowed, a swirl of purple and blue light, but Kalira's gaze was fixed on Ryan. "You have shown me something my empire forgot," she said. "Strength is not only in power but in care, in laughter, even in this small creature." Ryan shrugged. "Cats do that, they make you see things differently. Plus, they're great at ignoring your titles. I mean, look at that guy." He pointed at Shadowfluff, who was licking its paw with regal indifference. "That's the true ruler of the galaxy right there." Kalira's ears twitched in amusement. "Perhaps you are right." There was a pause between them, warm but unspoken. Ryan cleared his throat. "So, what now? Are you planning to, I don't know, make a royal decree about adopting stray animals across the Empire?" Kalira tilted her head, considering. "Perhaps, but first I think I will invite you to remain here, as my advisor on human matters." Ryan blinked. "Wait, are you offering me a job?" Or he stopped, seeing the faint smile on her lips. "Oh, that's what this is." "Do you accept?" she asked, voice quiet but firm. Ryan looked at Shadowfluff, who yawned and promptly curled up in Kalira's lap as if declaring this conversation unimportant. "Yeah," Ryan said, grinning. I guess I do, but only if I get hazard pay for dealing with that little tyrant. Kalira allowed herself a rare laugh, soft and genuine. Agreed. In the days that followed, the Empire's tone shifted. Where once there had been whispers of doubt, there were now whispers of admiration. The Queen, who had adopted a fragile creature, had proven that compassion was not weakness, but another form of command, one that could bind people together just as tightly as fear. Shadowfluff became the symbol of this quiet revolution, lounging on council tables as if presiding over every decision. Ryan settled into his new role with his usual irreverence, teasing Kalira often, though never crossing the line. Their conversations grew easier, warmer. Sometimes, late at night, they would walk the palace gardens with Shadowfluff trotting ahead like a self-appointed guardian of the universe. One evening, as they watched the stars bloom across the horizon, Ryan said, "You've changed, you know." Kalira looked at him. "Perhaps I have." "Good," he said. "You were terrifying before. Now you're just terrifying with better PR." She smirked. "And you, Ryan Holt, have become far too comfortable. Someone has to keep you from becoming an untouchable space goddess," he replied, grinning. Shadowfluff meowed at their feet as if in agreement. The sound broke the moment into something lighter, more human. Kalira looked out at the stars, the weight of her empire still on her shoulders, but lighter now somehow. "Perhaps this is only the beginning," she said quietly. "Yeah," Ryan said, "and I'm sticking around to see what's next, unless Shadowfluff fires me." The kitten blinked up at them, tail flicking with royal authority. And in that moment, with laughter mingling with the hum of the stars and the quiet purr of the tiniest, most unexpected ambassador of peace, the Empire felt just a little more alive.